geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, comic book fans from all over the world, gats and gittens, welcome back to another episode of Ask Chuck Dixon. The lesson has begun. Take your seats. We're going to dive deep into the College of Insider Comic Book Knowledge with me, your host, Chuck Dixon, as you ask me questions about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living, strangely enough, is write comic books. So if you ain't interested in comic books, find some other podcast. Okay, here we go. David Jordan. He's written an essay, but I appreciate it. It's worth all of our time, all of our precious time. David Jordan says, the big difference between manga and comics I've noticed over the years is that in manga, they're not afraid to take an action scene or fight and make it go up to 5 or 6 pages, sometimes more, sometimes many more in a few I've read, with minimal or no dialogue. In comics, it seems like that's a big no-no. Is that an established or unwritten rule in comics writing, or is this something that American writers don't think to do? I know you're really good about not jamming a lot of dialogue into every scene, and your action is always clear and easy to follow and able to flow like a good movie. But I don't think even you've gone as long with an action scene as some manga does. Was that a conscious decision to only go so long? Well, largely it's an issue of real estate, David. Mangas, if you'll notice, are thick. Your average manga book is 150, 200 pages long, or even longer. And if we get to the anthologies where they combine them, these things can literally be doorstops. So they got a lot more room to play with than the average American comic book writer does. A single manga volume is longer than an American trade paperback. Also, mangas are read differently. If you've ever watched a Japanese manga fan read a manga, they blister through them. And I saw this myself. I used to go to the Kinokuniya bookshop, which was near DC's offices in New York. And every time I went up there, I stopped in at Kinokuniya before coming home and would buy some manga, all in Japanese, but I still loved it. Gogol 13, things like that. And one time on the way home on the train, a young Japanese guy saw me looking through them and said, "Can I read one of them?" I said, yeah. If you have time between here and and when we get off I get off the train in Philadelphia, you can read them. Well, he read them all. He read them all in an hour and a half train ride. And I watched him. I was fascinated because he just blistered through, just turning pages as fast as he could. I mean, basically, he's it's like a movie on paper for him. He's not stopping to admire the illustrations or anything else. He's spending just enough time to read the dialogue or sound effects or captions he needs to read to continue on with the story. And that's how they're read. They're not read like American comics. It's a whole different thing. Speaking of things, I mean, I look forward every summer when I was a kid to the Hulk Thing fight that would generally show up in Fantastic Four comics or somewhere at Marvel every summer, because summer was the time when they were selling more comics. It was kind of an annual event. And even with Kirby, dedicating an entire issue of Fantastic Four to Thing and Hulk fighting, it didn't take up the whole story. You didn't get a 22 page battle between the two of them because there's just not enough room. Just not enough room. And as I said, American comics and European comics are read differently than manga. They're in the same medium, but not read the same way. Not the same species or breed of comics. And it's as simple as that. I mean, if I wrote manga, I'd give you 50-page fights if I could. I'd love it. Be fantastic. There's just no room. No room. Funny, isn't it, that this tiny little island nation, there's plenty of room in their comics. And here we are in the big old United States, sea to shining sea. And we can't do more than a 5 or 6 page action scene. Peter Bowl, question 1. Oh, Peter says, I'm loving the direction Alpha Core is going. During the helicopter scene, Brian is shot with ammunition that took him out. Later, it was revealed to be spent plutonium bullets. I did some research and I couldn't find any info on that specific ammunition, but I could find depleted uranium. Could you talk through the different research you did when looking into bullets and weapons? Yeah, I was very much aware of spent uranium rounds used in artillery rounds and sometimes anti-aircraft or anti-tank weapons. But I just amped it up to, depleted uranium because it's the Rippaverse. I can just make stuff up. Yeah, Brian was, nearly taken, well, he was taken down and nearly taken out by those, low yield nuke bullets that the bad guys were shooting at him in that sequence. But glad you dug it. And here you go. We saw this coming. Twin spin, my friend. And Peter is back with question 2. When Brian was shot with the special bullets, he went flying into a building and was knocked out. How do you write power scaling? For example, how strong is Brian? What can he take or not take? How do you work out the limits of powerful characters? Well, I very much approach Brian Solari. And for those of you who don't read Rippa books, most of the superheroes don't have superhero names. So Brian Solari is very much a public citizen. He is a super cop. He is an employee of the Flora Spark Police Department. And so he just goes by his own name. And so anyway, I'm treating Brian Solari like Superman, like the early evolution of Superman. Siegel and Schuster did not work out all of Superman's powers at the beginning of the story. We see that he sort of learns the limits of his abilities as he goes on because he was basically born with these powers. And we're all born with talents and powers and abilities. It takes time to bring them out, and we have to foster them and discover, hey, I can write backwards, or I can do a somersault, or I have, double jointed elbows. We discover this as we go along in life. It's very much the case with Brian. And for me in the stories, it's kind of a hidden suspense element. How much can Brian take? How much punishment can he? And I punished the poor guy. I mean, he just gets wasted over and over and over again, but always comes back because he has this extraordinary healing power, which he derived along with his powers from, the military experiment that made him, a superhero. So I'm constantly now, so I'm leaving out that idea that with enough punishment, this guy could die. I don't want to leave that off the table. I want you to be concerned about the guy. And that's the fun part of working in Rippaverse, is exploring their powers. And I deal a lot with that in upcoming stories. Are there enhancements? Are there things where they can push the limits, or are these limits finite in the powers that these characters have? So there you go. I will certainly, before the end of the year, if you read the comics and like them, you will see Braxwell tested to his limit. We will find out more about the limits of his abilities. Triple spin. And here we go with another Rippa question. Peter Bowles back with question 3. Have you worked out the future of Alpha Core and Horseman after the Exclave event? How far in the future have you thought about these characters? Well, way too far, as it turns out, because I had written issues 4 and number 4 of both Alpha Core and the Horseman, and then the Exclave event got dumped on me. I just write too far ahead. So I'm writing way past deadlines, as I always do. But it was fine because it kind of worked out. I mean, my Alpha Core Horseman storyline is somewhat interrupted, but not really. by the Exclave event. Of course, the Exclave event interrupts everything at the Ripper universe. All the books that were, character development and arcs and everything else are thrown out of whack by this this event, which, is what happens in the story. People's lives are interrupted. Flora Spark is in peril. This is like an extinction event. It's like huge stuff going on, and all of the heroes in the Rippaverse are tested to their very limits. And, so we will see that in the story. But I've thought way, way out there for this. I mean, Joe and I are working on like costume designs and stuff like that for the future. I mean, we are just focused, running. And that's kind of what you have to do, or that's kind of really, it's kind of what happens. I get involved in a universe. I get involved in this new reality and the world building and everything else. And the stories kind of build upon themselves. It's like, what are the challenges? Because I like, as I said before, I like ongoing superhero origins. I don't like issue 1. I got all my powers. I know what to do. And issue 2, I meet my arch nemesis. I don't like those. I'm done with that. Yes, Spider-Man, fantastic. Love Spider-Man template and everything else, but I'm not going to follow it to that degree. And we don't have the demands that those monthly books had of introducing the arch nemesis, introducing a brand new villain every month, to try to capture the reader's imagination. The Rippaverse readers are kind of involved in the lives of these characters, so we can spend a little bit more time there. Not that I'm going to sacrifice action for soap opera, but we are building characters here. So there you go. I hope that answered the question. And here we go. Quadruple spin. Peter's on a roll. Q4, how far in advance did you know about the Exclave event? Did you write far into the future, or did the Exclave event come out of nowhere? Did a lot of plans change? I'm not talking out of school here, man. It was just dropped like, what? It's like, boom, here's Exclave, and here's your deadlines. And the deadlines were like, I don't know how the other people dealt with it. These are deadlines that I was used to getting back at Marvel and DC. Like, can you write this story? Can you have this whole thing done in a week? We need it next week, and we need the other one the week after that. It was like, okay, you have dropped the gauntlet. I'm fine with that. I had a few questions. I talked to the Saskas because they seemed to know more about this event than I did, and they were able to clarify things for me. Because the event that as presented to me was kind of, it was almost like a pitch. It wasn't specifically laying out things I needed to know, and I had a lot of questions. And even then, I just sort of ran with it. It's like, I don't quite understand some of this stuff, but I'm just going to run with it and see if I run into a problem. And I've written my first 2 scripts. These is like a special mini series within Exclave. It's called Alpha Core and the Horseman. So it gives you kind of an idea of what might be happening in this story. And it's 3 issues. And I've written Alpha Core and the Horseman 1 and 2. They've both been approved, so I didn't make any enormous boo-boos. And the stuff I proposed in the first and second issue will be resolved in 3. So I'm sure that's, approved, because the concepts I came up with, I kind of played with some of the elements of Exclave. They're cool with it. So I am easy peasy off to write number 3. But this stuff happens. I mean, this stuff happened to me all the time at DC. And people, they interrupted your storyline. Well, it was kind of my fault because I write so far ahead. So I just realized this might happen. So I'm able to move things around. But if you're reading Alpha Core and the Horseman, this doesn't really interrupt their storyline. It kind of enhances it. You're not going to be like, at the end of Alpha Core 3, the Alpha Core and the Horseman number 1 kind of continues part of that storyline to ease, and then Exclave happens. And Exclave comes as much as a surprise to our heroes as it did to me. So, which is cool. But it's a big event, and I think it's designed to build upon this enormous deal that Ripa has made with Hachette to get the books into retail. And if you're not aware, if you're even a casual Ripa fan, a lot of Ripa content is available for order and pre-order now almost anywhere you buy books. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Walmart, you can go out there and catch up and keep up with the Ripaverse, which is kind of cool. I mean, it's a big, if you've never heard of Hachette, it's like, I can't even, nothing. I guess Ingram would be the only other people, out there, but Hachette is a global publishing empire. And now Ripa is part of it. And it's a much, much bigger deal than, say, if Ripa had made a deal with Amazon. Because Amazon tends to, I know I'm off on a tangent, but it's my show. You can ask for your money back at the door. You make a deal with Amazon, and this is what DC and Marvel did, literally a deal with the devil. You make a deal with Amazon, and they're going to do your comics, your digital comics, let's say. Amazon then buries those comics because now they have eliminated the competition. Amazon only absorbs and makes deals with people to bury them or imitate them, so that your product is going to sell less. And I can attest to this. Digital sales on comics from both Marvel and DC went into a steep nosedive after they made their deal with Amazon. Now, Eric's smarter than that. So he makes a deal with Hachette, who deals retail books across a wider sphere and will actually promote them. They want to sell books. They are not eliminating competition. They are adding saleable content to their catalog. Their enormous catalog, but they're not going to bury Ripa. They're going to promote Ripa. And there's the difference. And like I said, I've been said all along that Eric was going to the next level. It wasn't going to be crowdfunding and pre-ordering and only dealing with the core fan base. Thank you, core fan base. You were the early adopters of Ripa. You've made it the success it's been so far, and you can take as much credit as we, the creators, can take in Ripa's success and Ripa's growing success as it goes global across the retail sphere. So anyway, a little bit of a commercial, a little bit of an inside. I don't know what that was, but I'm enthusiastic about it because I want more crowdfunders to move out of the crowdfunding space and into retail because crowdfunding is not going to go on forever. All right. Partika. I can't remember your first name. Mike? I'm going to say Mike. I covered it up with my own logo. Hold on here. Hold on. I want to get this right. It is. It's Mike Partika. I thought I remembered it right. My good friend, Mike Partika. He's got a bit of an essay too. He says, recently I had to evaluate a short story, and one piece of criticism I had for it was, quote, it doesn't feel like any of the characters changed or grew or learned anything, unquote. Thinking about comics, though, I began to wonder, quote, how essential is the interior change in one or more characters to a short story, TV episode, or comic book issue, unquote. Take TV detective shows, for example. We really didn't expect Columbo or Matlock to experience internal change. So who does, if anyone? That got me thinking about comics like Batman or The Punisher, where the main characters, at least once upon a time, stayed pretty much constant in their personal worldviews. Can a comic story or short story in any other medium really work? There's no internal change on anyone's part. Does there always need to be some kind of internal change going on in each issue, even if that change isn't immediately obvious to the reader-viewer? Like in the example of TV detective shows, maybe the revelation of the killer causes internal changes in characters on account of how they see the killer, or even how they see the victim once the killer's motives are revealed. Is internal change or a shift in perspective something you try to incorporate into each of your stories, or is it optional for you? And if optional, when do you think it's best to incorporate it? Yeah, I mean, on a, TV detectives is a good example. They had to remain constant. They couldn't, have some tragedy that changed their character or whatever. They couldn't experience character arcs because, ideally these shows would go into syndication and, quite possibly be run out of order. And each show had to be complete unto itself unless it was a two-parter. So Jim Rockford or Columbo or Kojak had to remain pretty much constant. Now they might have an emotional moment where their humanity is revealed a little bit more or something like that. But generally, it was status quo every week, which is perfectly understandable because there was, if these shows ran 4, 5, 6 seasons, there was no overall arc. There was no ending in sight for them because they were going to be constantly recycled. That doesn't say that the characters didn't have depth, or the characters couldn't surprise you now and then, but it was all within that, 60-minute episode. Now, superheroes with their, decades and decades long history, there really can't be a lot of character arcs. It's always got to go back to status quo. So it's just a part and parcel of comics. Now you can, largely the job of a comic book writer is to bring out the character. Bring out what makes Superman special or what makes the Hulk different. So you're going to bring these things out, but that's really all you can do because the reader expects, well, until recently, according to the nitwits editing comics at the Big Two now, who think that there's some sort of mythical moderate audience that wants changes in the characters. But for the rest of us, lifer comic book fans, pretty much want status quo. You want Superman always to be Superman, Spider-Man always to be Spider-Man, Wolverine always to be Wolverine. You don't want them to change. You just want to see them in really cool adventures that, like I say, bring out their character and their personalities and all the rest of us and their badassery. Now, in Birds of Prey, I kind of had them on a long arc of discovery because the girls were always they were always running up against unintended consequences, which is cool. It's de rigueur for a comic book character or any kind of fictional genre character to run into unintended consequences, complications and obstacles and difficulties arise that they did not foresee. But in the case of Birds of Prey, I wanted to make the point that Oracle, at the beginning of every adventure, Oracle, because she could, glean things from the internet and deep searches and her huge database and all of her skills at research, she would send Dinah into adventures where Oracle thought she had all the answers. But Barbara would find out quickly, I don't have all the answers. My information was wrong or flawed or biased in some way that always complicated the mission for Dinah, always put her in more danger and more jeopardy than she should have been in. And this was kind of a running theme. And it wasn't, okay, Barbara's stupid or she's inept or anything else. It was largely a comment on the irony of the quote unquote age of information, which we were in at the time when I was writing these. And I always thought, well, the irony of the age of information is that almost everything is wrong that you find and you discover. And so Oracle is on this, she's learning more and more, we have to prepare for variables. Maybe I don't have the right answer. Maybe I'm dropping Dinah into a situation where we've picked the wrong side, things like that. So that's one where, there was a general overall arc. Now, I don't know if any other writers picked up on that or resolved that or had Barbara, have a revelation, a come to Jesus moment where she realizes, maybe I'm not so good at this. Sort of hint at it. There's a beautiful, beautiful page by Butch Geis in which Barbara realizes she's doing radio communications through some sort of time travel device that we had in the story. And she realizes that she is in communication, she is in quote unquote live communication with the United States bomber mission over Germany in 1944. And Butch just threw this terrific reaction as Barbara realizes, oh my God, what have I glommed onto? What am I listening to? And so things like that would occur through the series to sort of raise questions for the characters. But that's the only time I really ever consciously wrote. And I think it was subconscious to begin with, because it was just my reaction to the whole idea that everything was going to be computer for the rest of our lives. And I was hearing all kinds of stupid predictions, the same kind of predictions that were made about the telegram and the telephone, that it was going to, just make the whole world so much better. And really, has it? Gentle Savage, what is your favorite superhero archetype, superhero personality type to write? For example, anti-heroes like Punisher or Wolverine, aspirational, hopeful characters like Superman, cheeky, trickster characters like Spider-Man and Nightwing, Robin, or moody, brooding characters like Batman. Also, aside from yourself, which writer do you think has handled Stephanie Brown's character the best in comics? Not Stephanie Powers, not the girl from U.N.C.L.E. Chuck, what are you talking about? I kind of like them all. It's all a challenge to bring out, like I said, the character, the core, the coolness factor of each character. Obviously, I dig the Punisher, very much an anti-hero, sometimes the villain in his own book. And that's kind of fun. Explore those dark corners. But, I like the feel-good blue sky characters. It's one of the things that attracted me to Rippaverse. Alpha Core, and to some extent the Horsemen, kind of blue sky, optimistic, happier characters. They're not down and dismal. They're not reacting to some past trauma. The Horseman is kind of to some degree, but it's not childhood trauma. But the others are just like, hey, we're good guys, and we have these abilities, and we're going to use them to help our fellow man. And I like that. I think that's very cool. Characters like Captain America, stalwart, unchallenged, heroes, just awesome guys who just kick ass, just badass guys, doing the Lord's work. And, the more fun characters, the more casual characters like Nightwing, they're cool to write. So I really don't have a favorite of all of them, a favorite superhero type or any kind of hero type. Now, as far as the spoiler goes, I haven't really ever read any spoiler past when I was writing it, because they stopped sending the comps. I had no reason to really look at what someone else has done. As I said before, it's like watching your kids go off with the new dad. You drop them off at McDonald's and they go off with this guy, and you're not a part of their lives anymore. So I'm not really a part of the ongoing creative process for Stephanie anymore. Although I did not appreciate her being tortured to death. I have to say that. Just glad they brought her back, but I wish we didn't have to kill her first in such an ugly way. I think it was Bill Willingham wrote those issues. Yeah, Bill. Stay away from my character. I know I can't say that. I have no control over it. They can do anything they want with Stephanie Brown, but please have some respect. Robert Hinman, if Titan were to ask you to write Savage Sword of Conan for them, say 3 issues or so per year, would you do it? Some of your best original gangster Savage Sword stories that I loved growing up were multi-issue arcs, Blood Circus, Blood on the Sand, and Emerald Lust, for example. Obviously I like writing Conan. I wrote 3 novels. I want to write more. I love Conan. He's a terrific character. He's one of my favorites. And I actually have an idea for a 4th possible novel, which I can't write because I don't have the permission But I could easily write that story as a Savage Sword issue or arc, were they to invite me. I'm not looking for the work, but I'd sure like to tell this story somewhere. I've got just a killer action set piece I've never seen done before. Nobody's really ever done before with Conan or any other character. And it's as badass as, the Tree of Life where he gets crucified. It's as badass as that, Conan overcoming impossible odds. So yeah, if I was invited, I would do that. Speaking of which, Pit of the Blind God, which was my third Conan novel, which we could not publish and which this is not the cover of. I just futzed this up on AI. I am offering for free, because I can't sell it. That would not be right. I'm offering for free the uncorrected manuscript of Pit of the Blind God. So you can read this novel in a watermarked, uncorrected manuscript loaded with all of my signature typos. And it's very simple. For a donation of $10 or more, a lot of you have bought this and donated and been very generous, for which I thank you. A donation to St Jude's Children's Hospital, where parents of, basically terminally ill children with cancer, they go there and they get cured, and parents never receive a bill. And they get state of the science, state of the art care, and, a second chance at life. And you folks have made a lot of that happen. Just off of Ask Chuck Dixon, you've contributed thousands of dollars to the hospital, for which I am eternally grateful. And if you go to Subscribestar and join for $5, all the information is there, and I will provide a link. And if you want to quit Subscribestar after 1 month, I'm fine with that. I just need to have a record of who got these manuscripts for possible future reference. So there you go. McCran Comics. What's with the long questions this week? Though I appreciate them. Since you are such a film buff and are conversant with the language of cinema as well as comics, have you ever entertained the notion of making your own movies? I know you've done screenplays and had the work adapted to film, but I mean fantasizing literally you as the director in the chair behind the camera. Have you ever been tempted to shoot something just for kicks in the backyard? With today's filming technology being so ubiquitous, is there a lost Chuck Dixon student film or short? I had dreams when I was a kid of being the next, Sam Peckinpah or Stanley Kubrick, growing up, high school and stuff like that, thinking, hey, this comics thing is cool, but what if I got into movies and film? Because that's where the money is. And I thought, I can do my own storyboarding and all of that would be cool. But it didn't happen. I didn't have the technology. I had a Super 8 camera with no sound. I wasn't very good at using it. I found editing boring. The technical aspects of filmmaking eluded me. I really didn't have a talent for it. I was just good at coming up with crazy ideas. But no follow through. And, you Super 8, there's no way I could afford 16 millimeter. We had a kid at my high school who made, he was a year older than me, and he made a really impressive 16 millimeter films, generally about the World War II era. And he was very good at editing and shooting and all the, and he was a bit of a nut, a bit of a character. Anybody who went to school with me at Upper Darby back then remembers this guy. A real character, but awesome, very, very creative dude. And I couldn't match that. And I didn't have his supply of cash. My family was lower middle class. So we didn't have money for that stuff. Now today, you can run out and make a movie with your phone. I mean, the number one film at the box office right now, as I speak, began as a series of shorts shot on some guy's phone for YouTube. And they were so good and they got so many people watching them that he got financing to make a feature film, and it's cleaning up. It's beating a Star Wars movie all to hell. And it's just a low-budget horror flick or mid-budget horror flick. but looks very good. I can't wait to see it. Looks fascinating. Um, Now, in my youth, my dreams of being a filmmaker only went so far as being accepted into the film school at Temple University, which is in North Philadelphia. And I don't know how my parents were going to pay for it, but I got accepted, no scholarship. And my mother had to go to the vice principal of my high school, who was a childhood friend of hers, and sort of work out, do a little magic with my transcripts and write a letter of recommendation. So I got into the Temple Film School by a squeaker. And I went to orientation, and there were hundreds of people there, applicants for the film school, or accepted at film school, I should say. And I was very unimpressed with the orientation, and I was very disappointed to learn that we wouldn't actually get into any kind of real film techniques. We wouldn't have cameras in our hand or editing equipment or any of the rest of it until the third year. And the rest of it was just going to be usual, required courses. So to me, it was, I don't want 2 more years of high school before I get into filming. And I left, they broke for lunch, and I left, and I never came back. Just got on the subway and came home and said, okay, that's it. It's comics for me. I'm going to be a comic book guy, and that's it. Forget movies. It's not happening for me. I don't have an uncle at one of the studios, so comic books, full speed ahead. No options, no plan B. Thank God it worked out. I don't know where I'd be today if it wasn't for comic books. Twin spin. McCran Comics is back with, how much thought can a writer put into their fiction before it's unhealthy? I know you've mentioned getting into a funk about time travel or imagining the Punisher while watching the news. Is there a recognizable point of, quote, I'm overly concerned with the contents of a utility belt and walking away for a while? Do you feel fairly divorced from it or preoccupied, invested most of the time? Yeah, I mean, you can get too far into it. I've never done that. The time travel thing is the only one. And the thing is that if I'm invested or thinking or really dug in, I'm thinking of the mechanics of the story. I'm not like living in that world. I'm not thinking, hey, I'm the Punisher walking down the mean streets of the Lower East Side. I don't go that far. I don't go as far as, say, a furry goes into their, internal fantasies. I'm thinking about the mechanics, which is why, and the mechanics of any story will, send me to another place. I've got the 1,000-yard stare. Somebody's talking to me and they think I'm listening. I'm a million miles away. I'm like Jack Kirby. I'm so lost in this world, I can't drive a car. I've never gone that far. Kirby literally could not drive a car because he would just sort of lose where he was. He would start thinking about some crazy idea and just, that the real world would vanish in front of his eyes. And I've never done that. I've never been blessed or cursed with that level of immersion into my work. But time travel, because it's almost like math and it's a more complicated, there's so many parallel things going on, at least for me, it really does consume me. It consumes my mind, and my wife says it takes my brain to a near schizophrenia. No, I'm not running around acting like a lunatic, but I'm kind of divorced from what's going on. And until I've worked out my time travel problem, until I've worked out the paradox or parallel or whatever. So yeah, that's the one case. But for the rest, I mean, I'm always walking around thinking about stories. I'm currently writing a Western, and I'm always, I'm almost to the end. And the last month or so, I've been struggling with blocking out because I want it to end on a boom. I want it to end memorably, and I know what I want to do, but I can't figure out how to get there. And I'm still blocking out, like the final 2 chapters of the book. So, always thinking. A writer is always right, or a good writer, a professional writer, a genre writer is always is always writing in their head. Triple spin. The spins keep coming. McCrayon Comics again. What do you think is the balance regarding the modern funny pages? On one hand, we get the same old Peanuts and Garfield recycled ad nauseum, preventing any new blood getting in. Do young people even read or aspire to draw for the papers anymore? Are the syndicates better off not trying to cater to a different demographic? Is it because the material is stale that young people are turned off, or is it just outmoded? Strips and gag panels still seem to do well on Instagram, but that's impermanent to me as it's not in print. A screenshot isn't the same as a cutout on the fridge. Am I overestimating young folks' exposure to classic strips and understanding the utility of reruns? Well, I think they largely rerun Peanuts and Garfield because of reader demand. I think if they tried to cancel these strips, even though some of them are decades old, they would get pushback. I always used to wonder when I was a kid why Nancy was even in the newspaper, because it was never funny and seemed really odd and very, very antiquated. Nancy and Sluggo. But I talked to a cartoonist, a political cartoonist at the Evening Bulletin one time, one of the Philadelphia dailies. And he told me the reason they don't cancel it is because every time they cancel it, they get 1,000 letters and 1,000 phone calls. Why did you? Because people were in the habit of reading Nancy every day and disturbed when it wasn't there. So when they would cancel Nancy, they'd always have to bring it back. And I think that's the case with Garfield and Peanuts. And, largely, though, the comic strip is like the comic book, like the big two, like the newsstand comic, the spin rack comic. The comic strips it's finished. It's on its last legs. It's a tradition kept around because it fills pages in the newspaper relatively cheaply. And like I said, if they took the funny pages away, they would lose circulation. Maybe not a huge amount of circulation, which is sad because once upon a time, and I was just reading about this recently, the comic strips, half the country read the comic strips, and the other half probably read them but wouldn't admit it. I mean, comics had 40 million readers, and the Sundays it went up even more. People followed these things religiously, and you did not miss. You couldn't wait. And if you read some of these strips in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, you can see why people were like, they had to know what came next. In the storyline, the adventure strips, particularly. And the adventure strips were really the ones driving everything. The humor strips were funny and everything else, but you could miss, Mutt and Jeff for a couple of weeks and you're not going to lose anything. You couldn't miss an episode of Little Abner. You'd never know how they saved Dog Patch from extermination once again. You couldn't miss a Terry and the Pirates or a Johnny Hazard, or even a Gasoline Alley, because then you'd be lost in the story. It'd be like coming in the middle of a movie. So these things were vital. I mean, millions and millions of readers and fans. And this is something that I learned that I didn't realize and couldn't even imagine in the article I read, was that comic books had even more readers. There were even more readers. Almost 100% of kids 12 and under in the United States read comic books. Comic books had an even bigger audience than the comic strips, and I thought it was the other way around. And that's even sadder that we lost that. And the newspapers, newspaper circulations went down. There's no interest. The funny pages weren't as much of a draw as they were, and these things happened over time. But there's no reason why the comic books had to stop being so popular. And the article I read said that at their height, that 95% of boys and 91% of girls read comic books. So, as I've said many times in these videos, comics weren't always a male-dominated medium. Girls bought lots and lots and lots of comic books. And it's all kind of sad. And, but they've shrunk the strips down. They're barely readable. And a lot of them are pretty lame. Not all of them. You got some people still in there fighting to do quality work, but and then when they do have something that is interesting and groundbreaking and tapped into the zeitgeist like Dilbert, they cancel it. So unfortunately, Dilbert is canceled forever with the death of Scott Adams. But he was canceled a few years ago simply for putting stuff in the strips that we all know today was true. So there you go. Quadruple spin. I think what I was trying to say was the strips are no longer relevant. Are they doing them for a new demographic? Well, then it's a demographic of nitwits with low expectations. McCran is back again. McCran Comics along a similar vein, has the superhero genre run its course? Did the 1980s deconstruction go beyond hope or repair? I don't think there's truly been a reconstruction since. Just a choice to ignore certain connotations. Has public perception of the concept been harmed too much to accept plain blue sky fare anymore? People are eating up The Boys and Invincible, but can't be bothered to watch Superman movie. The Guy. And I think that was more than just James Gunn's fault. Does the superhero still have a place in contemporary pop culture, or are Spidey and company heading the way of the Yellow Kid? Yeah, I mean, sad superheroes. Who wants them? Or mean superheroes, or nasty superheroes, or fetishistic, gay-centric superheroes. I mean, who wants them? We don't need them, but I think we do need them. But I think largely, I don't want to beat a dead horse. I don't want to keep saying the same thing over and over again. But I think the superhero cycle's over. It's done with. Now, Batman. Well, I once thought Superman would survive it. Apparently, that's not going to be the case. But Batman and Spider-Man will survive it, because Batman and Spider-Man continue to capture the imagination of the public. They're that indelible. They're that iconic. And they will continue on. So, everything runs its course. And I think the cycle's over. I think they need to retreat a little bit and stop, going to the well over and over again with the same characters. But Batman and Spider-Man will survive, as I've said before, like James Bond survived the spy cycle in the 60s, because he was such an indelible character and had such an impact on the pop culture. Now, manga will, they don't do this. Again, manga, One Piece has run for years and years and years, but there will be an end. There will come a time where One Piece will end. There won't be One Piece, or some of the longer running mangas will not be around, 3 decades from now. They don't wear out their welcome the way American comic book characters often do. But, in the end, it's all up to the public and what they'll buy. And I think that if Rippaverse is certainly trying to restart the genre, and I think to some extent they are. The retail space will determine. We've been successful amongst our core fan base. Will we be successful over the long haul? Will we be successful with a larger, more casual reading public? I certainly think so. I think the quality is there. And again, like any other superhero franchise, we're going to have our hits and our misses. We're going to have characters that stand out, maybe become indelible. Will Alpha Corps, will Isom, will the Horsemen someday become as indelible, iconic figures as Superman, Batman, or Spider-Man? And, or maybe we just back off for a while and hope for a comeback like vinyl has had, like Blu-rays have had recently, a rise in purchasing physical material, physical content. And, so who knows? Maybe, superhero comics will become hip again. And I think they are, because sales of, trade paperbacks and collections and stuff, it seems like the older they are, the more they sell. So people do want good quality, consistent comic book material. They just don't want what's being done now by the big two. But other places, crowdfunding, RIPA, in small independent publishers still doing vital comics in the superhero genre. So there you go. Hey, Bruno Bookstore at gmail.com. Bruno Bookstore at gmail.com is where you need to go if you want to send in your questions, like these excellent people this week with their, thoughtful, thought-provoking, probing inquiries. They went to Bruno Bookstore at gmail.com, and I saw their questions and put their names on the internet. It's very special. So that's it for me this week. I want to thank you for liking and listening and subscribing and all that other good stuff. And hopefully I'll see you all down the road. Bye-bye.